Hey, Clayton, in reading Genesis 4, after Cain kills Abel, he goes to the land of Nod and gets married. If Adam and Eve were the only people on earth, where did Cain's wife and all the other people come from? This is a great question, one that many people find as they're reading through. It's almost a frustrating thing when you're reading the Bible because the Bible doesn't always answer the questions we're curious about. It's trying to address certain things, but it's not just trying to say, well, if you're curious about this, let me tell you. And sometimes we're asking questions that the Bible simply is not interested in answering for us. But this is one of those ones where lots of people have said, how do we explain this? Where does this come from? We don't have the exact answer, but let me tell you how people would answer it depending on their differing views on creation. So we mention often when we're reading Genesis, early parts of Genesis, that there are kind of three major views that you might find around Christ Community Church or in wider Christianity about creation. And those are the 24-hour day view, the day-age view, and the evolutionary creation view. And these are three views looking at Genesis chapter 1. And in Genesis chapter 1, how literal do you take those days? So the 24-hour day view is the view that those days are literal, and it happened a short period of time ago. And in that view, the assumption is that Adam and Eve would have had more children than just Cain and Abel. We're just not told about them. And because of that, and this is a weird thought, people would have married their siblings. So Cain, Abel, if they had spouses, would have married their sisters, right? And so there were probably other children that were born. And over the course of time, especially if there are longer lifespans for people in Genesis, they would have spread out and had children and grandchildren and so on. People would have been marrying cousins, of course, and they would have had enough people to found villages and cities and so on. And now there's kind of an ick factor to this. You say, oh, that's kind of weird. But here's a thing worth remembering. And this may still have an X factor, but it's true. In many times and places, it has been ordinary to marry what we would consider close relatives. Marrying a cousin, strangely enough, was not so uncommon in the past. If you think about it, it's really, it makes a lot of sense. If people lived in small communities where there wasn't a lot of people coming and going, okay, we live in a highly mobile society, and so it's very strange to only have the same people in your town for generations after time. The population is always changing. But in most places, people stayed put for generations. And so if you were going to marry someone in a small community, it's probable that they were closely related to someone at least a couple of generations back. So marrying a first or second cousin wouldn't have been unlikely. And even in the Bible, marrying a sibling, we have occasions of that. So Abraham married his half-sister, and there are other examples of that sort of thing. So people say, you know what, if Cain had to marry a sister, maybe that's what happened, okay? If you hold the day-age view says these days are symbolic of long periods of time. In that view, the idea is that Adam and Eve were the first two humans created, and so the same challenge would apply to that view. The day-age view thinks there was a lot of time before Adam and Eve, but Adam and Eve were the first two individual human beings, which means Cain would have had to marry a sibling. The difference comes in the evolutionary creation view. In the evolutionary creation view, that view holds that human beings evolved in the same way that the scientific account currently describes. The idea there is that God used the process of evolution to bring about a set of creatures that were hominids, okay, kind of pre-human hominids, and that at some point God looked at that group of creatures and said, I am going to do a new thing here, and I'm going to bestow the image of God. I'm going to breathe the breath of life into these creatures and call them something different, right? Like I'm going to make something more than just a mere animal out of them. I am going to raise them up to be my representatives, to be spiritually connected to me, to be made in the image of God. But what God was using were creatures that he had developed through the process of evolution. Now, in that case, the scientific consensus is that in order for there to be a group of hominids that could evolve, you would need somewhere minimally between 10 and 30,000 individuals within that group for there to be enough genetic material for this to work. And so the idea behind the evolutionary creation view is that what God did is he elevated those creatures to be made in the image of God and then called two individuals, Adam and Eve, to be the king and queen of creation and to represent the people in the Garden of Eden. And so he appointed them in this special role, but that doesn't mean they were the only individuals. The evolutionary creation account assumes that there would have been other human beings that would have developed and would have been a part of their community, Adam and Eve being the representatives of that community. So in that case, if Cain killed his brother and fled to a different place, there could have been other human beings in a city in another place. There could have been people that he was not closely related to in another place. And so Cain would have had plenty of people to choose from and plenty of people to start a city with. So different views, different approaches to that question. Thanks for listening. If you've got your own questions, email questions@BibleSavvy.com. Like and subscribe to catch our regular episodes every Monday on the Bible Savvy Podcast.